Good evening and welcome everyone. We're so happy that you're here with us this evening and it's fun to see you all tonight. We are doing a different format with the book club this time than what we've done in the past by having a Zoom meeting, which gives us the opportunity to have breakout discussion groups following Linda Conradi's comments. The music you heard as you joined is from Principia alum Ian Case from the Spring Virtual Alumni Concert. If you haven't had a chance to hear that concert or the one in October, I encourage you to go back and listen to those concerts. They're just phenomenal. I will post the link to the concerts and our previous recordings in the chat box. I'm Marilee McFarland, the Director of Alumni and Field Relations. And we're so grateful that you've joined us for the November book talk with Linda Conradi on the book, The Dutch House by Ann Patchett. I hope that you enjoyed the book as much as I did. I loved listening to it and hearing Tom Hanks read the book. It was so fun. I wanted to share about a couple of upcoming events. Tomorrow, December 1st, is Giving Tuesday. This global day of giving highlights the importance of so many nonprofit organizations all around the world. And here at Principia, we could not do what we do in the classrooms or on the playing field or through programs like this without the incredible support of donors who see the value in Principia today. I hope that you will join me in donating to Principia on Giving Tuesday, and when we actually just launched at 6:00 p.m., so you can start donating now. There are a variety of opportunities to give to specific projects and matches for your donation. I'll include the link to donate in the chat box. We are so grateful for the outpouring of contributions from alumni and friends all around the world. You are invited to join us in December for all of the virtual Christmas festivities, from traditional Christmas caroling parties to a virtual Christmas concert that will have performances from alumni like Larry Gross and Stephanie Trick, as well as performances from current Principia students, all the way from our Acorn Sugar Plum students through college. So we're really excited to invite you all to join us virtually in December for all of the Christmas festivities. You can visit principia.edu/Christmas for the full schedule of events, and we cannot wait to jingle and mingle with you this holiday season. We will be taking December off from the book club, but look forward to seeing you back in January for another wonderful book and discussion. Stay tuned for that book title and more information about all of our virtual events in 2021. Before I turn the screen over, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker. Linda Conradi is a graduate of Principia College with a degree in English and education. She holds a master's degree of liberal arts from Washington University here in St. Louis. During her 18 years working at Principia, Linda served in a variety of positions, from editor of publications to English teacher to researcher for Principia's Centennial History book. She thoroughly enjoys fascinating book discussions, which she has done as a faculty member at summer session for several years, including leading a Principia lifelong learning trip to Montreal in 2018. Linda is joining us tonight from Duluth, Minnesota, where she lives and is currently making use of her quiet time at home, catching up on her reading and walking in her neighborhood by the shores of Lake Superior, which these days I'm sure she is bundling up for those walks. Following Linda's talk, as I mentioned, we will be splitting into breakout rooms for 15 to 20 minutes for each of you to share your insights from the book, or if you haven't had a chance to read the book yet, you can share your insights from what Linda has prepared in her talk. Linda will be prompting you with discussion questions, and following the breakout sessions, we will come back for a few more remarks from Linda. We invite you to submit any questions or insights from the book in the chat box throughout the talk. Today's talk is being recorded and will be posted in the next couple of days on our virtual events webpage. The portion of the talk that is being recorded is this time when we're all together in the room and not in the individual discussion sessions. So you don't need to worry about those discussion sessions being part of the recording. You can also find recordings of the concerts and talks, as I mentioned, over the last 8 months, and I'll post that link in the chat box. We are so grateful to Linda for joining us today. So please join me in welcoming Linda Conradi.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. What fun to have a glimpse of you while Marilee was doing the introduction. It was like going to the movies, seeing all my old friends and new friends, and just delighted to have you here to share some insights, yours and mine, on this thought-provoking book, The Dutch House by Ann Patchett. Before I move on to the next slide, I would like to take a few moments just to talk about the artwork on the cover of the book. Ann Patchett, as many of you know, has written a number of books through the years, and she's also the co-owner of a bookstore in Nashville, Tennessee called Parnassus Books. And on her website, she answers questions about the writing of this book. So if you go, you just Google her name or Parnassus Books, and you can come up with answering questions about the Dutch House. Apparently, she was pretty inundated with questions when she first wrote it. And one of the things she talks about is the artwork on the cover. And one of my questions to you is, if this book is called The Dutch House, why isn't there a picture of it on the cover? And of course, as soon as we get into the book and get acquainted with the characters, we know that this is Maeve Conroy at age 10, sitting for a portrait. Her father had hired a professional artist to come in and to paint her mother, and her mother refused to sit for him. So Maeve did, and she's wearing her favorite red coat, and she had very long dark hair and was tall. She was tall from the time she was very young. I think so was her father and so was her brother. Anyway, in the book, we hear that her direct gaze comes from being put on the wall across from the big old portraits of the previous owners of the home, the Van Hubecks. And she says that's where she learned to stare at people. So there she was on the wall. Anyway, this portrait was painted by an artist from Nashville, Satterstrom, Noah Satterstrom, I believe his name is. And when Ann Patchett called and asked him if he could do it, he said, I can paint it in the next 4 days, or I can paint it in a year. And she said 4 days later, she had this wonderful portrait just based on the brief description she had given of this young girl. And she said she purchased it from him, and it now hangs on her living room wall, which I think is really kind of an interesting story about a book jacket. Okay, just a second here. I get to move to my slideshow. The author, Ann Patchett, there's also a picture of her in the back of the book jacket, and this is it. I've cropped it a little bit. But I thought it was kind of fun because she also appears to be sitting for a portrait, and it's interesting that they put the same art behind her as you see on the front. It's the wallpaper of the imaginary swallows and the roses. And I thought that was great fun. A little bit about the author. If you're not familiar with Ann Patchett, I think her last book was 2016. It was called Commonwealth. She's written several books through the years. One, Bel Canto, I think that was even made into a movie. She is well known as a speaker, and she also goes around the country and interviews other authors, which is apparently how she got to know Tom Hanks. Those of you who listened to the audio version of this book were treated to quite a performance by Tom Hanks, who is the narrator. And one of the questions she has been asked so many times is, how did you get him to do this? And apparently she had spent a couple of hours with him, interviewing him for a big program somewhere, and had gotten acquainted with him. And so she said she simply picked up the phone and called him and asked him if he would narrate the book. And he said, send me the manuscript. And so I often read my books in hardcover or paperback. When I heard that Tom Hanks was the narrator of this book, that's the way I was introduced to it. I listened to it first, which was a little bit unusual for me. And then I went to the hard copy. I don't know what your reaction was, and you can share this with each other when you get into the chat rooms, but I felt like I was sitting on a soft couch with Grandpa with his arm around me while he was reading me a story. And I felt that way pretty much throughout the whole book. Tom Hanks has the most wonderful, mellow, listening voice. So I needn't tell you, you all are very familiar with him. But that just gives you a little bit of background about the book jacket and the author. And now I would like to go, for those of you who have not had an opportunity to read yet, let me just give you a quick thumbnail sketch. I don't think there are any, big surprises that we need to keep from you tonight. I don't think we will spoil your reading, but the complexity of this novel, as those of you who have spent some time with it have found out, this complexity lies in the effects of this grand house, the Dutch house, on the Conradi family. And Maeve and Danny are left as young children when their mother takes off to go work with the poor in India. And she is never comfortable in this big house that her husband bought as a surprise for her. She just felt that that just wasn't who she was. And so the father remarries this woman named Andrea. And Danny and Maeve suspect she married him because she wanted the Dutch house. They were never quite, the young people were never quite sure about the relationship their father had with Andrea. Well, Andrea came with 2 young daughters of her own. So this was your real blended family. And they were together for several years. Maeve and Danny really took these 2 younger girls under their wing. And there were some hiccups along the way. Oh, excuse me, let me turn this off. I'm sorry about that. So the hiccups along the way, as those of you who got into the story know, were pretty startling. And when Maeve and Danny failed to immediately notify Andrea that her husband, their father, had had a heart attack and suddenly died, there were repercussions, let's put it that way. And I think that as they grow up, they never quite ever get over it. And Maeve is 7 years older than Danny. She pretty much mothers him along with the household help, the nanny, whose name is Fluffy, and the housekeeper and the cook, Jocelyn and Sandy. They really kind of raise Danny and take care of him. But I think, let me go on to this, when they grow up and Danny ends up going to New York to go to college. He goes to Columbia, and then he goes to medical school, doesn't become, well, he becomes a doctor, but he doesn't practice. But I put this section of the map up because those of us who don't live on the East Coast maybe aren't so aware of how close together cities are. Philadelphia is where this story takes place, in a suburb called Egan's Park. And he goes to New York, and you can see on this map, they are just a short commuter ride apart, which was important for me to learn because he's back and forth all the time to visit Maeve. And he sets up his work as a realtor in New York City, and marries, has children of his own. And I think it's interesting, the patterns that you see repeating themselves from one generation to the next, particularly with the nanny. The nanny was Fluffy when he was growing up, and they hired Fluffy to be the nanny for their own children, Celeste and Danny. So she became a part of the family and really filled Celeste in on all of the family history. Well, the Dutch house itself is mythical. You know, you can't go to Philadelphia and drive around Egan's Park and look for it because it isn't there. And I'd like to ask you why you think Ann Patchett was really, she was very certain that she did not want a picture of a house on the cover of this book. So was she asking the readers to create this house in their imagination? And I think my answer is yes, because you have these wonderful descriptions. And I know that when they describe standing at the front step, there's glass. You can see right into the foyer, you can see into the observatory, and you can see out the back to the lilacs blooming in the back. These, of course, are not at the Dutch house because, as I just said, there is no Dutch house. These are in Duluth, Minnesota in May. But Danny talks about going back to the Dutch house, and you know that he and Maeve have this peculiar obsession with parking down the street from the Dutch house for years and years and years. They get in the car and they go over there and they sit and look at the Dutch house and relive the history. However sad and tragic it was to them, they just keep reliving it. And Danny talks one time also about being there in the springtime and seeing, this is not a cherry tree, this is, I think, a crabapple, but seeing and smelling and feeling the springtime around them, the all the blossoms. This is in our civic center here in Duluth, but I was just so struck by it. It's such a fantastic tree, especially when it's in bloom. But to go back to the story at the Dutch house, the Van Hubecks were Dutch, and they made their fortune through selling cigarettes to the soldiers in World War I. And then they lived off the money from that all the way through the Depression. And both of them passed away, and the house went to the bank. And Cyril, through a couple of other amazing circumstances, had the money. He was still working for the Navy and living in Philadelphia with Maeve and her mother, Elena. And he was able to buy this house as a surprise. It was fully furnished. Everything that the Van Hubecks had was still there. So you get this amazing house that they go and they sit in front of it and smoke their cigarettes and rehash their lives. And I don't know what your perception of the relationship is between Danny and Maeve, but it seems unusual to me. And maybe I would throw that out there to you when you get into your discussion groups, that you might talk a little bit about this sibling relationship and how interdependent it was, how they leaned on each other. And of course, there was friction then with Celeste, Danny's wife, because there was always jealousy over how much time he was spending with his sister and his mother. So I think Cyril Conroy, the father, is a little bit of a mystery. He doesn't seem to relate too well to people. And in fact, Danny notes that he's most at home when he's at his construction company and working on projects and that sort of thing. We're sort of struck by the what do I want to say? The relationship that Danny and Maeve have, and then as you move ahead through the years, and Danny has children, how much you see patterns repeated from one generation to the next. Most interesting to me. I was also interested in how much Maeve orchestrated Danny's life. Throughout her whole life, she did. And selecting his prep school, his college, grad school, choice of career, all of that. And it's so, excuse me, I've got to move some papers here. It's so interesting to me to think about the characters and the interplay. And what about Andrea? What is her role in this story? And in a talk, Ann Patchett said that she created Andrea, the wicked stepmother, to be the kind of stepmother she herself never wants to be. And I ask you, does this cast of characters need a stepmother to bring some salt and vinegar and contrast? Or is she there as a test of the strength of character of the others in the story? I'll say that again. Is Andrea a part of this story because she is the test of the strength of the character of the others? Think about her reaction to not being told immediately of Cyril's sudden passing, and her actions and their effect on Maeve and Danny through the rest of their life. And I ask you, are they justified in holding a nearly lifelong grudge against her? Well, why or why not? Sometimes in the story, when they were sitting trashing Andrea, when they're sitting at the curb smoking their cigarettes, hiding kind of behind the linden trees, I just wanted to say, get over it. Get on with your lives. Be curious to know what your response is to this whole complicated situation. And then, as the story goes on, Elna comes back. She resurfaces at a time when Maeve is very ill, and she welcomes her mother back into her life, chastises Danny because he didn't really know his mother very well, and I think he just kind of always believed that a mother never leaves her children, and that's that. So we have Elna coming back, spending time again with Maeve, and then this amazing scenario that unfolds when she's driving and she wants to go back to the Dutch house, and they meet up with Andrea. Okay, now you have the two Mrs. Conroys, Cyril's first wife and Cyril's second wife. And I'll not take up your time spending too much time talking about that, but you might want to with one another. So I'd like to ask you, what kind of themes emerge in this story? It appears to be a story of a dysfunctional family, and yet it's so much more. I think it's a story that reminds us of our humanity. It reminds us of our disappointments as well as our successes. It's a story about kindness as well as bitterness. And throughout the story, we might even have moments where we find our own conscience nudged as we consider how we might have better handled sticky situations. Do we block our own growth and happiness by doing exactly what these two people did? They reacted and reacted and reacted and fed on their bitterness and disappointment for years and years and years. And yet, I want to go on to ask you. I'm going to go quickly through the next couple slides. We're moving along, and I want to give you time to be together. This was, by the way, this was New York, where Danny became a realtor, set up his life there. But I wanted to get to this slide because life's better when we're connected. I actually took that in Times Square a few years ago when I was there, and it cracked me up because we're so connected when this was in the day when you were in crowds of people every time you were ever in New York. And in Times Square, it's like a constant party and entertainment going on. And I looked up and saw this sign, life's better when we're connected. And I was scrolling through some of my slides, and I thought this made me laugh because it made me think so much of the characters in this story and how they create their own happiness and unhappiness with their connections and their disconnections. So this is a picture of a very brief glimpse of a rainbow over Lake Superior. And as you know, you can look up and see a rainbow and then look up again and you think, where did it go? So I ask you, think about moments with the memorable characters. Fluffy certainly has a long history with that family. And she also becomes a storyteller of the family history to Celeste. So there's continuity in that story, carried on by Fluffy. There's so much in this story to unpack. Let's just get to one more kind of thought-provoking theme that comes through. This is, by the way, this is a too close-up picture of an outdoor floral display at the Minnesota Institute of the Minneapolis Institute of Art. Every spring they do flowers, what's it called? Art in Bloom. And this is outside the door. Every year they have a most fantastic thing. Well, of course, they weren't able to do it this last year. And I missed going. But this is a whole full figure of a woman dressed in moss, cradling flowers. And there's something so poignant to me about this. It's not easy to find visuals to go with concepts. And so that's kind of my story of choosing this one. But okay, forgiveness and redemption as it has to do with the story in the Dutch house. Where do we see it? And maybe if we had had forgiveness sooner and redemption, life could have gone on faster or happier. I'm going to throw that one out to you to see if you have some responses to it. in your reading of this story. And then before we break up, I would just like to go to one grand house, which is recognizable to those of you who know the Principia College campus. This is one of the dormitories designed by Bernard Maeve. He designed the campus to be representative of an English country village. Of course, built on the bluffs over the Mississippi, looking out over the cornfields. Nevertheless, many of us spent several years of our lives as college students living in these magnificent buildings where architectural detail became something that I know I savored and loved and cherished the whole time that I was there. So by not picturing a grand house on the cover of her book, I think Ann Patchett did us all a huge favor, because she helps us stretch our own imaginations to grand houses that we have seen, or bits and pieces of architectural detail that we have loved. And so I think she was a wise person in choosing to depict a character on the cover of this. So before we break up, I would like to go to one more slide, and this is a few of the possible discussion questions. And thank you for listening to my condensed ramble. I have been through this book several times, and each time I come away with kind of different ideas. So I hope I've covered some of the major points that you too have been thinking about. But just a quick rundown on these, and certainly bring your own responses to the book to one another and your questions. Of course, the characters we talked a little bit about, who's memorable and why. Why does this Dutch house have such a hold on Maeve and Danny? That's not an easy question to answer. And how do you relate to this story? Did you relate to it at all? How do you deal with forgiveness? And then following the whole storyline, does the ending surprise you? How? What universal themes emerge? What makes this book a good candidate for the Pulitzer? It was a finalist this last spring for the 2020 Pulitzer Prize in Fiction. And then finally, what is your takeaway from this story? So thank you for listening, and enjoy your visits. And I will be popping in and out. I may not say anything, but I'll be popping in and out listening to your discussions. I hope, if you haven't read the book yet, that you'll be intrigued enough to read it. And if you have read it and maybe hadn't thought about some of the ideas that we've talked about tonight, that you'll go back and spend some more time with this book. And asking yourself, why read it? Why is it worthwhile reading? What can I take away? How has this book enriched my life? I think those are all worthy questions to ask when we are giving our dividing up our time for all different things. But I just, as a kind of way of wrapping up tonight, I'd like to say, this last year has been so difficult for all of us because we've had to make so many changes. And so here's what I have to say. When the world as we know it tilts in new and challenging directions, we have books in which to immerse ourselves, new places to explore, characters to meet, dilemmas to solve, and then we emerge to share with others how this story has touched us, educated, changed us. Reading keeps us connected. And I'm so grateful to Principia for hosting this tonight and bringing all of us together. As you all know, I love to read, and I would actually love to keep in touch. I have not checked this with Marilee, but I believe if you do want to be in touch with me, she can help you do that. So thank you all so much for being here tonight, and I'll turn it back to Marilee.
Great. Well, and Linda, you put it so eloquently, but that's how we feel about all of these virtual events. We've loved coming together as this larger Principia family and connecting, and we're so grateful to Linda for all of the book discussions that she's led over the past few months, and look forward to more opportunities to connect. So on behalf of the entire Alumni and Field Relations team, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. And we hope again that you will join us for our upcoming virtual events with all of the Christmas festivities. So whether you join us for a traditional Christmas sing, we've had fun thinking about how we take those favorite and beloved Principia Club Christmas sings. And I know I see many of you who have attended those or led them for years, and having them be virtual this year, or our Christmas concert, or we're doing a special caroling party just for kids. So if you have kids or grandkids or folks you know from your Sunday school or Principia families that would like to join in, please have them go to principia.edu/Christmas. And then we're also doing a karaoke and trivia night. So there is something for everyone. We look forward to seeing you in December and invite you to join us in contributing to Principia on Giving Tuesday tomorrow. And just thank you all so much. We look forward to seeing you in December and wish you a very happy holidays and back for more book club events in 2021. So have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Good night.